Chauffeurs who drive around rich people. What are some of the weird/shocking conversations you've overheard? Story 1. About 25 years ago, I had a summer job at a very tiny country club. 6-figure joining fee, 5-figure continuing membership dues, and that got you nothing but the privilege of paying top dollar for rounds, food, etc. I was a porter some of the time as we had cottages on club grounds for members to stay and make a weekend of it. One of my duties was driving members to and from airports, usually private airports for private jets. One time I'm driving 2 guys to the airport and one of them starts complaining. Seems he and his wife are always fighting over who gets the jet every weekend and where they want to go. Well, the other one replied, "My third jet is actually just gathering dust right now since my son went to college. Want to take it off my hands?" They shook on it right there in the van. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. When we were in high school, my friend used to caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he would be willing to drive him around while he went out partying. This was like 2003 and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 p.m. Right off the bat, the guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit. My friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him another $200 and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of drugs. They went to another bar. He handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple hours later with a girl. He was married with kids. He handed my friend another $200 and they went back to her house. After they banged, he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. At this point, it was like 2 to 3 a.m. My friend said that the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water up to his ankles in his shoes, threw a bunch of rocks into the water, and then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car, he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. None of us really believed my friend when this happened until the guy he drove got arrested for assault and possession of drugs like 6 months later. Paid all that money and his friend still couldn't keep the secret, huh? Story 3. Friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osmond. Fairly simple gig. Go to the airport and pick up Marie Osmond, who was to be the featured entertainer at a private event. Plane comes in, he meets her. She has a carry-on bag, but her checked suitcase containing her stage dresses and makeup is missing. She is unflappable, though. Asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects 2 long sequenced cocktail dresses, and goes to the fitting room to try them on, without him, of course. Unfortunately, there are 2 entrances and exits to the fitting room, and Marie Osmond exits out through the other side and cannot find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the other side she'd entered. 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong, so he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osmond. The manager thinks she is being pranked and declines. Chauffeur buddy is in a mini panic mode now, running wildly around the store asking random customers, "Have you seen Marie Osmond?" Store security is summoned, and he is asked to leave the premises right now. He calls his employer and tells them he has lost Marie Osmond. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number, but has her agent's number, and he is not accepting calls. She has, in the meantime, taken a cab to the gig, thinking she has been forgotten. Lots of apologies eventually ensued, and there were no repercussions. Story 4. Not a chauffeur, but seemed like a good chance to remind people of the story of John Bonner, at the time Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, third in line for the presidency, not knowing how to use Uber. As the story goes, one of his aides downloaded the app onto his phone and showed him how to use it. Unknown to him, he'd been stuck on the carpooling option, Uberpool. That's what he used for years. There are all sorts of tales of commuters hopping into their carpool and bam, there's John Bonner stuck in a middle seat asking to get dropped off at the Capitol building. However you feel about his politics, I think that's pretty funny. Story 5. Not a chauffeur, and I was a participant in this conversation. I used to tutor an oligarch's daughter in Rublevka, the wealthy suburb outside Moscow. One day she mentioned that she likes to ski. I asked her which kind of skiing she preferred. Downhill is more popular where I'm from, but cross-country is quite popular in Russia. It's even part of some school's curriculum. Her answer? My favorite type of skiing is the type where you jump out of a helicopter. Silly me. I forgot about that kind. I want you all to know that there are some failed attempts at a Russian accent that are definitely not being used by the editor. But I want you to know that I tried. It just, wasn't worth it. Story 6. Not sure if I qualify, but I did drive Uber Black for a while in NYC. Had a few interesting situations. One time I was driving a young woman, and right before the destination, she screamed for me to pull over. When I asked her what was wrong, she pointed to the couple that was kissing in front of the building. Apparently, the man was her fiancé. She didn't get out, she didn't cry, but she did ask if I could take her back to where I picked her up from. I'll never forget her face. It was the saddest face I have ever seen in person. Another time, I was picking up a group of guys outside of a club early in the morning, and as the first guy stumbled in, a Glock fell out of his coat pocket. We just locked eyes and said, "Hope that's not for me." I was nervous and didn't really know what to do or say. Probably my favorite was picking up 2 college-aged girls from what I can only assume was a party. They were very drunk, and the second girl was basically completely gone. They were going all the way to Ridgewood, which was almost an hour. Girl A was pretty talkative and funny. Girl B looked to be completely passed out / sleeping and didn't move the whole trip. We made it to Ridgewood, and girl B sits up suddenly, looks around, opens the door, and vomits everywhere. She seemed fine after that, but I just kept thanking her for making it the whole way and not throwing up all over my car. Story 7. I used to drive limousine and taxi. One time I got the manager of a fairly famous Canadian band in my car, asking me where to buy coke. I had no idea where, and I told him that. So his bright idea was to find an escort, hire her, and ask her. I told him I couldn't help him pick up escorts either. He was disappointed but understood. He had me drive a well-known street until he saw an escort. He asked me to pull over, got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and then immediately flagged me down again as a new ride. I knew what was up, but whatever. He gets back into the car with the escort and she tells him exactly what house to go to for some drugs. I take them there and wait a bit. They come back out and I drive him back to the venue. He then offers me 2 free tickets to the show, which I gladly accepted as I love that band, and had actually seen them 3 times live. Alas, since I was still working during the show, I had to give them away to 2 friends who had never seen the band. They had a good time, and I have a fun story to share with them about how I scored those tickets. Not really a shocking conversation and hardly a famous person, but it was interesting how easily and full of trust people can be about searching out and buying drugs in a strange city. For the record, this was 2003. Story 8. Buddy of mine ended up picking up a Netflix producer while doing Uber. He said they had a great conversation as he brought him to his hotel. The producer invited him up for a drink, and since my friend was a film student, he thought it would be a good idea to go and try to get some good networking in. They hung out for about an hour, when he asked my friend if he knew of any massage places that did happy endings. He didn't, but the guy paid him $500 to bring him to the closest massage place, which was only a few miles out. Upon dropping him off there, he gave my buddy a card and said, "There's a big party / festival I'm hosting. That's your ticket in. I'll let you know then if I get that happy ending." Haha. He got the happy ending, by the way. Story 9. Drove LIMO at Marquette University during undergrad and grad school. Some of these students that went there were obscenely wealthy. Limos are the vans that drive drunk students anywhere on campus and a few blocks outside of campus. Couple things I remember randomly from it. 1. Drunk guy leaves his wallet on a van and another driver calls it in, so me and another supervisor can take it to campus police. We pick up the wallet from the driver and open it to get the student ID so they know who to email. There had to be a few grand in there, and when we called the kid to tell him about it, he told us we could just keep it because it was too far from his dorm to bother picking up. Okay, sure. 2. I picked up a couple girls from HEO, and they spent the entire ride talking about how it was ridiculous that one of the girl's parents planned on making her pay for her own apartment after graduation, and there was nothing even livable under $2,000 a month. The school is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 3. Mardi Gras is the name of a campus ministry trip where you use your spring break to build houses and drink in somewhere that doesn't get snow in April. One of the people on my van was getting a free night of drinks from his buddies because he paid for everyone's trips. And 5. It is a free service and a frat star tried to pay me for the ride with a Ziploc baggie of drugs. I said no, he called me a legend and left $20 in the cup holder before I realized it. Story 10. Wasn't exactly a chauffeur, but I did have the distinguished privilege of working with a multimillionaire one time for a couple of days. And I was just astounded at how out of touch he was with people. One conversation he was talking about how he hated all the new homes they were building and he liked old castles. So he was having a castle in Scotland disassembled and reassembled here in the US, piece by piece. On another occasion, he asked me why I wasn't in college yet. The job was after high school and I was working as a plumber, and gave me an "oh, right," when I told him I couldn't afford to go yet and had to save up. Yeah, this is big. It's just a banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10? Energy. The super rich really just have no frame of reference for how usual people live. Story 11. This is not a limo story, but this thread reminded me of a rich guy story. My daughter played soccer for many years, and at one practice, a guy drove up in a Ferrari, got out, and started talking to another of the dads on the team. After a few minutes, the guy left, and another of the dads went over there and asked him who that guy was. He replied that the guy was his lawyer or something. I come to find out years later that the guy in the Ferrari was a multi-millionaire and had one and only one client, that dad, and his only job was to handle that dad's charitable donations. So this dude got filthy rich donating millions of dollars of somebody else's money and taking a percentage off the top. The dad, who was apparently worth several $100 million, never came across as rich at all. He wore sweats and was at every practice and game. He drove a Camry, had been married to his average-looking wife for like 25 years, stuff like that. Acted like a normal guy like the rest of us. Story 12. One of my best friends used to drive Uber in a wealthy area of LA. He told me many stories about drunk celebs and TikTokers in his car. Someone offered him a bag of weed because they felt sorry for their friend throwing up in the back seat. Most people were just normal though. Some highlights. Quentin Tarantino and Trisha Paytas were making out in his back seat when they were secretly dating. Mike Tyson is apparently very nice in person and also a giant pothead. Somebody on Gossip Girl and her friend were arguing about chicken nuggets and tried to get him to go through a Wendy's drive-thru during the lunch rush, when there were already 10 cars in line. Addison Rae, or one of her friends, took their shoes off and left them in the car. Leo DiCaprio took more than 5 minutes to find the car. He seemed out of it, and was quietly bobbing his head listening to music on his headphones. Story 13. Not a chauffeur. A small part of my family was Chicago Mafia. Grandpa told me of a story of a family wedding in Chicago they went to in the late 60s. They were picked up at the airport by a limo with some high-ranking family members. On the way to the hotel, they were stopped about 8 times by various police officers. The officer would walk up to the driver's window, the chauffeur would reach into a money bag and pass a bill to the officer. Nothing would ever be said, and they would take off again. Eventually, my grandpa asked if they were being bribed. His cousin, Mafia, laughed and said, "No, it's Thursday. That's when we pay our boys." I guess that's how they did it. Looks like a traffic stop and in the open where it's not unexpected. So I'd imagine that chauffeur had seen some things. Story 14. My uncle was a teamster. One of those teamsters. I didn't understand it when I was younger, but we'd go to Reno or Vegas and never have to pay for a damn thing. We wanted to go on vacation, he'd get someone to give us a vacation home to stay in. Anyway, we go home to Hawaii one year, and we're met at the airport by a limo. Kid me thought that this was amazing since I'd never ridden in one before. Had a ball. But I couldn't figure out why my dad, one of the most laid-back, salt-of-the-earth, blue-collar guys you've ever met, was scowling and looking around like his head was on a swivel. Years later, I found out it was an armored limo. Some rivals had firebombed my uncle's car, and he took no chances that we'd become targets. I remember that vacation as being fairly normal, except for the limo, and my uncle coming over with more colleagues than he usually had with him. Story 15. I was driving as Uber, and I picked up 2 businessmen in an industrial park. They were building developers. The man who was clearly the boss spoke to me as if I were a man, and I was always the driver who picked him up. Although they were clearly from the Middle East, they chose to speak English. Maybe they thought it was rude not to, being in the US? But if that would have been rude, I'm not sure what the rest of the conversation was. They spoke about the future of business, as if it were all so futile, and how everyone will either be very wealthy like them or very poor, and how their children really won't be able to get jobs either but also won't need to. I logged more than 4,000 rides between 2015 and 2017, and that was one of the weirdest. The other weirdest guy I picked up from a dispensary. He was really good looking, very well dressed, and clearly well-to-do, but he was in some kind of mental distress. He wanted to visit more dispensaries but had clearly already bought the max. I got his hotel information through the conversation and went there instead. On the way, he told me, in all seriousness, all about how his father was God, which meant that he was Jesus. "Didn't you notice how much brighter the sun became when I got in your car?" He was serious. He also followed Guns N' Roses like they were the Grateful Dead. He thought Axl Rose was the smartest man alive. He didn't really notice when we got to his hotel instead of the dispensary. I did ask him if he had taken any other drugs that day, and he insisted he hadn't. That was also one of the weirdest. Opie is crazy lucky, are you kidding me? Most people see Jesus in toast. He saw him in his Uber. Now that's a story for, I don't know, whatever news site will pick that up. Story 16. Not a driver, but I used to caddy at a fairly exclusive country club in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a membership. You're either born into it or marry a member. As a result, a lot of the members like to show off their influence by inviting guests who would otherwise be unable to play at the club. Someone invited Mitt Romney. We were given a heads up that the governor, he wasn't a senator yet, would be coming, and they wanted us to know how to act around him. We were told he wanted to be treated like anyone else, but they didn't want us to gawk. So I guess to make sure us dumb caddies weren't gawking, we were instructed to not look at or acknowledge the governor, because this is precisely how we would treat other people. I did get to shake his member and chat a bit. He was friendly, personable, and way nicer than a lot of the members. I still don't like a lot of his politics, but he seemed nice enough in person. Story 17. Not a chauffeur, but I work in high-end real estate, so I'm in the homes of the affluent a lot. Once I was in a home selling for over $10 million with 2 Bentleys in the garage. I overhear the homeowner talking to her friend in the next room. These new tax laws are killing us in the middle class. We had to open another trust just to save more money this year. Insane that this woman really believes that she's the middle class. Another time in another multi-million-dollar house. The homeowner said to me, "These billionaires are pricing us millionaires out of the neighborhood." She was referring to her gated community in Park City, and I was apparently supposed to feel sorry for her. I remember seeing a video a little while back of people trying to guess rich people trying to guess the average salary in the United States. And there were all these guesses like, oh, I don't know, like 150,000, 180,000. No, you crazies, it's like 40K. People's sense of scale really gets screwed up. It's nuts. Story 18. I was a driver/bodyguard for an OG rich Chinese guy who came to Canada in the 90s. During a drunken drive home, he told me about his birth story. His mom was an artist, and one of the top officials in the CCP had an affair and impregnated her. Magically, she had papers to immigrate to any nation she desired. He and another rich Chinese friend planned to steal the money his dad was going to give him to pay for his 4-year college program, move to the city the school he was accepted to was in, and trade penny stocks and find a virgin escort. It was the first time I got double shock. One of the last major conversations I have working for him was how dark-skinned people are scary, so it's not racist. That Chinese people as a whole view it like that, and no sensitivity/racism training would explain it well enough to make Chinese people as a whole change their mind. I asked him how it was that he hired me, other than being scary. 2 weeks later, he replaced me with 2 big white guys. As a Chinese person, I feel obligated to say, no, I don't find dark-skinned people scary. That was just this dude, I promise. Although, who knows, I'm only half, maybe I left that gene behind. Story 19. Picked up a wedding party. Bride, bridesmaid, and bride's boyfriend, who was paying for the wedding. They had a magnum of champagne, and we drove around for quite some time while they snorted drugs in the back. They were using rolled-up 50s and 20s, then tossing them to me in the front seat as tip money. I dutifully brushed off each bill and added them to my wallet, pretending not to know what was going on. The couple argued off and on about showing up to the wedding. Apparently, she felt weird about getting married, and he was trying to convince her that it was a good idea. Finally dropped them off at the church, and he slipped me a matchbook with his name and number written on it. Yeah, it was the late 80s, and I was a young woman. One of the only female limo drivers at the time in the city. Scored a sweet leather jacket from the tips from that night. So many weird stories. Story 20. I drove Uber part-time on Saturday nights. I would start the app directly in front of one bar in Hoboken. That was the bar that the Fox News people go to, so long rides. Meet on-air and behind-the-scene talent. One night was bringing back one of the on-air talent, a woman, and no, I won't say which. The 3 guys basically came to the conclusion that all 3 were not being invited in, and also that they were drunk and she had been the one who set the destination. They ended up hailing an Uber, which was mine, and I drove them home. So there you go. At least one woman who was on the air at Fox News basically convinced 3 men that there would be a group banging session, and decided that there would not be. Not laughing was one of the hardest things I have done in my whole life.